I recognize a lot of you guys from our past film club. We're really excited to introduce our third and final Native Filmmaker Initiative Film Club of this season here today for the film Sweetheart Dancers. Thanks for all that are able to be here. And if your video works and you want to show us your classroom, we'd love to see your faces. So feel free to turn that video on if you want to ask questions. For those of you that are new to the film club, our Native Filmmaker Film Club is our virtual youth education outreach program that takes Indigenous-made documentary films into classrooms across the state of Montana, like classrooms like yours. The film club is a part of a larger initiative which aims to bring more Indigenous stories to the festival, support and engage our Indigenous media arts community, and have a greater impact on community youth. Today, I'm coming in from Seattle, but I work for Big Sky Film Institute, which is in Missoula, Montana, and the city of Missoula sits on Salish land. Montana is home to 12 tribal nations and 7 Indian reservations with their own culture, language, identity, and history, only underscoring the importance of sharing such a diverse range of films such as these and uplifting Indigenous communities across North America and the rest of the world. We encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat. So if you'd like to say the school you're joining in from, classroom, and the land that you're occupying, we encourage you to do so in the chat there. If you're wanting to ask questions live, feel free to raise your hand so we can see you in the video, or raise your reaction, like click the reaction button and give a thumbs up and we'll go to you next as we're kind of round robining around for different classrooms to ask their questions. You can also ask questions in the chat and we'll get to those as well. So we'll be kind of ping-ponging between those 3 things today. I am really excited to welcome the director, Ben-Alex Dupris, who's joining us today. Ben-Alex is a very prolific filmmaker and is an enrolled member of the Colville Confederated Tribes, where he grew up. And his film, Sweetheart Dancers, which we'll be talking about today, debuted at the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival, which is under our umbrella organization here in 2019, and won the grand jury for Best Documentary Short at Outfest LA the same year. He's an inaugural alumni of the Concordia Studios Artist in Residence Program and Firelight Media Impact Producers Fellow, and he also teaches Indigenous Mythology and Film at Duke University's Center for Documentary Studies, and he also co-wrote portions of our NFI Film Club online course for any teachers that were taking that. So we're very excited to have him here. Also with us is Mike Jetty, who is our Office of Public Instruction Indian Education Specialist, who helps us review our curriculum and helps integrate our dialogue into special essential understandings for Indian education for the state. So we are very excited. We hope to be joined here today by Adrian Stevens and Sean Snyder, who I think will be a little bit late today, who've been dancing powwows since they could walk. Adrian hails from Fort Duchesne. Am I saying that right? Ben-Alex?
Fort Duchesne.
Fort Duchesne as
yeah.
Great. Thanks. And is on the Northern Ute and Shoshone-Bannock and San Carlos Apache tribes. And Snyder is of the Navajo and Southern, is it Ute or Ute? Am I saying that correctly?
Ute, like Utes.
Ute, great, tribe. And they spend much of their time on the road, which they'll be joining in from today. And their participation in the Sweetheart Dancers specials, as you all saw, has propelled them to become activists for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ communities across North America. So they're very, very involved. A special thanks to the Llewellyn Foundation, William B. Pratt Endowment Fund, Greater Montana Foundation, and Humanities Montana for supporting this program and making these discussions possible. We're really excited to be joining you virtually today and have these special guests. And so I'm just going to start off today with a few questions for Ben-Alex, and then we'll open it up to classrooms for any specific questions that they have as we kind of engage in this discussion today. So I just wanted to start off a question to Ben-Alex to just kind of talk about some general themes and the importance of drawing attention to an issue. You know, this film is such a powerful portrait of resilience and staying true to yourself, which I think are really important themes for our young people to be hearing. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you got started on this journey and how and your relationship with Sean and Adrian kind of came about and how you got involved in the making of this film.
Yeah, absolutely. I was at the Sundance Film Festival and I met a photographer, a cool guy named Salone Gray Mountain. And he said his cousin had been disqualified from a powwow because he tried to dance with his partner, who was also, they were two spirit, right? And so I said, yeah, let me meet with them. And I got together. We visited, and I agreed that I would like to make a film about their story. And at the time, I was entering Concordia, which is a really cool fellowship in LA, where there's a lot of fun filmmakers who are trying to figure out the best way to tell stories. And we kind of drafted Sweetheart Dancers and went and filmed it at the Gathering of Nations in Albuquerque, and filmed at their home in Mesquite, Nevada, and made the film. And it was born out of this. I grew up on the reservations like a lot of you. I grew up getting bullied, because I was a skateboarder, and there was things that I did that a lot of my cousins and my friends didn't do. They wanted to ride horses. They were, they powwowed. They're rodeo families. And I was kind of always had crazy pink hair and my skateboards and my Vans, and I was always having fun and just thinking about, what I liked about, sports like snowboarding and mountain sports. And so I guess, I was different than a lot of the kids at the time. There wasn't a lot of people on my res like that. So, I got bullied a lot and they made fun of me. And so I kind of felt like that's kind of maybe the same feeling of this whole movie, is this feeling that, as kids, we have all these adults who are trying to protect us and help us. But in reality, it's hard. It's hard, right? Because, teacher turns their back, or the parent isn't really involved in the conversation, and then you still get picked on. And so I just feel like, this is kind of a story that was born out of being bullied as a kid, and knowing that as you grow up, I can do something about it. I can say something. I can make an example of what it feels like, and show people what it feels like when your feelings are hurt. But then you don't stop. You don't end it there. You push forward. You get resilient. You get strong, and you stand up for yourself. And I think that that's what the lesson of this story really is though I'm not two spirit, I've three kids of my own, and I've been married almost 12 years now. But it is a feeling that we always have. As you get older, you still feel the feeling of being picked on. You still feel bullied, whether it's someone who wants to, harass you for a bill you didn't pay, or, wants you to get out of line at a grocery store or something. You're always going to face bullies. So the question is, in your life, are you going to allow that to be a defining thing for you? Or are you going to be someone who allows yourself to feel bad? Because that's so inherently about being Indian, is always feeling bullied and picked on and feeling bad for yourself. I mean, that's just kind of how we grew up. I'm sure a lot of you understand that. So Sweetheart Dancers is a resistance movie through love, through the success of being close to your family and friends, and lifting yourself up when you feel down, because not everyone's always going to be there to make you feel better. You got to do it yourself.
Yeah. Well, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that specific significance of having two-spirit representation at the powwow. I mean, in addition to it being on screen in this film, I think the film alludes to it and talks a little bit about it, but some people might not be familiar with this history of repression of two-spirit people, and why this is such a pivotal, important shift in the direction it's going.
Yeah, I mean, a long, long time ago, when the Catholic boarding schools and the Jesuit churches all came into our communities and our towns, and they brought, some stability and good relationships with a lot of our great grandparents and parents. They'll talk very highly about the Jesuits and the missionaries that came through our area, and so it's not all negative, but there is a negative side of it, and that's that. That during this era, they were really forcing Indians to not speak their language. They were forcing us to cut our hair, to forget about traditionalism, and this was all part of a government mandated boarding school initiative, which means that the government wanted us to no longer be Indian. And that is the root of a lot of these confusing moments where we look at something like being a two-spirit, or what they call, a same-sex couple, and feeling negative feelings about it because of the way that it's been portrayed in the media and in Hollywood and throughout time. But in our culture, we've always had two-spirit representation. We've always had spiritual leaders, chiefs, and people who really took care of the communities, and elders who we revered forever, for thousands of years. And that changed quickly within the last 150 years. So now what's happening is a lot of people, as they come back to traditionalism and culture, they're more interested in finding what our great grandparents believed. And in that world, in that paradigm of our culture, being two-spirit is a very special thing. It's not something to make fun of or be disrespectful towards. It's just part of who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I'm wondering, Mike, if there's anything there you'd like to add. You work in the world of education.
Sure. Well, hamitakiapi, Peto Aste, Yuha. Hello, my relatives. Hope you're having a good day out there. But, Ben-Alex, you bring up a good point. Long time ago, it was different, and so a good example that here at OPI, we have a cool publication called Resilience, and it's 20 stories of Montana Indian women who have really shaped our state. But one of those chapters is about women warriors. And 3 of those women warriors were transgender, a Kootenai woman, a Pend Oreille woman, and a Crow woman, who all took on the role of a man and actually took wives throughout their lives, but well-respected warriors within their tribe, and they weren't looked down upon. They were highly esteemed, in their society. So, it's just part of the norm. It wasn't considered, bad or something to be made fun of. It was, everybody was, in the circle and respected. And like within Dakota culture, we have a term called winkte. And it's interesting to see how that has shifted because of what you mentioned, Ben-Alex, about dominant cultural influences and how that word has become kind of negative now. But it means, a man who has taken on the role of a woman. But traditionally, they were considered sacred. They were, powerful in their own way. But now it's become kind of a negative term. And I think folks are reclaiming that, saying, hey, that was something imposed on us, that belief. And it's all about respect and love and relationships. And I think the more we dig back into those older traditions, I think those values are good to put forward. And films like this help share that, going back to our traditional values. It's not to say we got to do away with all these other things. It's just incorporating those to, help us out today. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it prompts a lot of questions, and it is addressing certain things like you're saying, like these people haven't been properly represented, even in films. Ben-Alex and I had talked a little bit about, there's not been a lot of films that focus on or highlight two-spirit couples like Sean and Adrian. And so I think it's important when we're talking about representation in film and why it's so important to highlight these stories. Just as you're saying, Mike, I think a lot of these themes come up. I'd love to open up questions for schools or students that have any questions, even if it's just something that really resonated with you in the film, or questions you have for Mike or Ben-Alex. Feel free to unmute and ask your questions. Or you can get a raise of hand if you have a question. I can see Magdalene Marmon's class, a student, if you want to unmute and come up.
Elsa, come on up.
Feel free to say your name too.
My name is Elsa. And I'm asking Ben-Alex, how long has he been a producer?
Great question. Did you hear that, Ben-Alex?
I think he froze up.
I think you froze up and left.
Oh, no.
We'll wait for him to boot back in.
while we're waiting for him, I think part of what I like about these films is to have native filmmakers and to have that perspective brought forward, because historically it's always been non-natives making films about natives, and to have that insider cultural perspective, I think, is powerful. It offers us another glimpse into that. So hopefully Ben-Alex comes back here. So.
Yeah, and I think he'll hopefully pop in here to answer that question. But I think that's a really good point,
Well,
Mike. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, here he comes.
There he is. We'll admit him back in, and he can take that question because we've got another chat question here in the chat. Make sure his audio is working.
Progress.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Hello? Hey.
We can hear you.
So there's once in a year storm happening in Las Vegas where I'm staying right now. So my apologies. Like apparently the wind is blowing everything away.
Shoot.
Sorry about that,
We've
everyone.
got you back. Did you hear that question? We had a question from Magdalene Marmon's class from Elsa.
No. Elsa, what was your question again? I'd love to answer.
Her question was, how long have you been a producer and worked in film?
Oh man, what a loaded question. Now, I've probably only been back into the film like the last 5 years, maybe 5.5 years. But I worked for a long time for my tribe, for the Tribal Tribune and on the Colville Tribal Reservation where I grew up, and just held office jobs. And years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I tried to make a run in Hollywood, and I wasn't really ready they weren't really receptive. We didn't have Res Dogs and Rutherford Falls and all these great movies and an independent film scene. It was pretty commercial, so I didn't really have a lot of success and went home pretty quickly after I started. But I always had that dream that I wanted to continue to make movies someday, and so luckily, now is the best time to be a filmmaker because everyone has an opportunity to tell their story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and we actually have a question from Willard High School here in the chat that was curious, more related to the film. Their question was there a process for changing the powwow rules?
No, I think each powwow, and of course Michael probably can speak to this as well. Every powwow has a powwow committee that is responsible for, taking care of the rules and picking selecting the special dances and all of the different honorings and dinner times and all that. The powwow committee handles that. So it just depends on what powwow you go to and what the committee determines affects all of that.
Right, and I'm sure that's different for different powwows. They have different
Yeah.
ways of pushing that
I
through.
mean, just like every city or town in the country is different. Every powwow committee is different based on where they live, where they're from, what they're used to seeing. If you're throwing the if you're throwing the Daybreak Star powwow in Seattle, it's a little different than Crow Fair or gatherings or any powwows on the East Coast, the Seminole powwows. There's so many different powwows with different. I guess it's regional, the way that people act, or I'm trying to think of all the right words to say here. That it's a very regional, right? And for the younger kids, it's just every town is different, So it just depends on where you go. Is how the powwow is.
Yeah, well, and Jennifer Stedden, who also works for OPI, put a essential understanding number 1, which in the chat, which says, essentially all tribes are very diverse and different and have their own rules and ways of doing things, and kind of encompasses a little bit of what you're saying there.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. You never know what they're going to be like, Some powwows are super, super traditional and some are super liberal and crazy, So it just depends on what kind of powwow you want.
Yeah. Well, and there's another question from Carolyn's classroom, which is Two-Spirit exclusively a Native American identification or term? And maybe you could explain a little bit about why that is the case.
I have heard that it is. I believe that it is based on what I've been told, and of course, Sean and Adrian haven't been able to make it with us yet so far, so I will answer that question, but it, I do think it has to do with the spiritual and cultural relationship of the people, to the identity. So I actually don't even know because I'm not two spirit, and I wouldn't even know what that means, honestly. And that's okay. It's okay to just know that we have roles in our societies and our culture that we know exist and we respect, but we don't fully understand. And I think with Two Spirit, it's a term that refers to their relationship to their spirituality and the way they perceive their dancing and their relationship to each other.
Mhm.
So you'll find this as you get older, or you start, if you really love English class. If you look at the root of the English language, it's very rudimentary. It's brand new. English language doesn't have. It's just kind of a hodgepodge of all these different languages, and from Latin to Old French to all these German. And so with English, it's almost like the Chinook jargon of the Northwest in the old days, where everyone's trying to find ways to communicate with each other through language. And in that translation, you lose a lot of the real meaning of our spiritual beliefs as Native people. And so Two Spirit is the closest that you can get in English to make sense of what that means. And if you have Two Spirit relatives, or someone that might be able to speak better on that, you can ask them as well.
Mhm.
It's all within our
Yeah.
languages.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind too, especially as we kind of put everything in the context of kind of post-colonial rule. And yeah, I think those histories really influence that in the way we talk about things. And we've got another question from a different classroom from Sam Hines's class, and you've touched on this a little bit, but his students want to know, why did you choose to direct this documentary? I know you touched on this a bit, but I wonder if you could expand on kind of, you talked a little bit how you met them, but maybe kind of moving forward with that process.
I mean, I chose to direct this story because I saw a story I wanted to tell, and it was offered to me, and that was important. I think as filmmakers, for me, it's not just about being a filmmaker so that like some sort of like weird cartoon where you go to Hollywood, you make movies and you're successful and you drive a nice car and you have a great life. Like that's the Hollywood cinematic dream of being a director producer is not my goal. Like I strictly enjoy being around Indian people and showing our culture and our ideas in a new light. Um, I have some very specific things I believe about the universe and about um, our role here as Indian people, and that's passed on to me from my relatives that I grew up with, and like my granny Isabel, who I knew. She was born in 1889, and I got to hear a lot of the history of our Northwest people, and all the way to my dad, who was actually born in 1934. So he had me when he was older already too. So I've always grown up around older people who've told me things about our culture and our way of life that have made me want to continue that storytelling and sharing that education with younger people who are interested in hearing it. So yeah, that's it. It's just I'm a storyteller, and I don't know how to do anything else. You couldn't hire me at Starbucks. I wouldn't be there on time. I wouldn't know what to do. That's just not my goal.
Mm-hmm.
But filmmaking is easy for me. That's the easiest thing I do.
Yeah, well, and the film asks some really interesting questions and poses Adrian and Sean as these really strong young leaders. And I'm curious, you kind of touched on this about storytelling and being really close with your elders, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of having young people pushing against these kind of outdated social norms in support of more traditional practices, kind of pre-Catholic Church influence.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of you who are in school right now, the new generation, you don't have to tell your stories through film. You can write a book right now if you want. You don't have to. You can make visual art. You can take photographs. You can find ways of being creative and exploring what you think about the world, because your perspective is important to us all. And we're listening. As much as I'm making movies, I'm supporting young filmmakers all the time, and I'm finding new art. I'm buying art off of kids on Etsy and other places, and I'm always looking to try to support your generations, your new generations of artists, because everything that you say and everything you do is important. And your positioning as being the new generation stepping forward, it's my role to tell you to step up, because that's what they did to me. But you don't have to be filmmakers. You can be anything you want. It's just a matter of having to remember that we loosely come from a large group of pan-Indianism, which is everyone on Turtle Island, and we all have certain beliefs about survival and respecting our cultures and making peace with ourselves in this modern world. And that's kind of what filmmaking does for me. But for you, you might be an attorney, you might be working at a health clinic, you might be a dentist. There might be all kinds of ways that you feel. But long ago, before all of colonization happened on our continent, families had roles, and they were born into certain practices, or they knew early on that they could practice medicine, or they could practice healing, or they were great hunters, or they were caretakers. Like, everyone had a role, and that's what's missing today in our societies, I think, is we don't really think about our roles anymore. So it's important just to continue to uplift people through stories, so that they can know how to find their path to their true calling, which I think each one of you students on this call today have.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to remember. We've got another question from Magdalene Marmon's class. If you want to come up to the camera, say your name and ask your question.
Oh, that's a loud class.
How did they win in the sweetheart? How did the sweetheart dancers win?
They didn't really. They won a place, but they didn't win the whole competition. But they had there was judges, just like at all powwows, and the judges decided who they thought was dancing the best, and then they saved that to the end and announced the winners, and they were chosen. Yeah. What's that? Oh, was that it?
I think that was their question.
I don't know exactly what they did to win. I don't know what moves were impressive to the judges, but they did something cool.
I'm curious too, and then we'll get another class question. What did you learn? Because you grew up going to powwows. Did you see them differently making this film? Is there something that you learned that was new to you? Getting a little bit more intimate with their practice and as they made their regalia?
You mean what was different about what they were doing?
Yeah, or something that was new to you as you learned more about their experience with powwows.
Yeah, I mean the styles have changed so much over the years, and every 2 to 5 years, there's a whole new morph, a shift in the way powwow is, and they definitely are representing within the partner sphere of dancing, something special and unique, and their matching regalia it's unique because it's two men. When you do matching regalia with a man and a woman, it's always different, because you have the dresses and the skirts, or the regalia it can be the same material, but it's never matching. I think that's what kind of looks striking with their regalia, is they match completely. It's like two completely exactly the same regalia. It's interesting. You don't see it that often unless you see team dancers, and that's not all the time. But I don't know. I don't know that there was anything super unique about what they were doing, other than that they were continuing to follow through and be resilient and tenacious, and just to continue to put themselves out there. because a lot of two-spirit dancers still don't have the confidence to step forward even today, even with Sean and Adrian being on billboards and the Nike N7 billboards they have in Times Square and Staples Center, LA and New York. And they're on a national Nike campaign, but at the same time, you still have a lot of native people who are afraid to step forward and represent themselves as a two-spirit, especially in the dance community. So I think that overall, what's striking is they're still one of the only couples out there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
It means more people need to dance.
Yeah, well, hopefully it opens some doors for more people and makes it a more inclusive and diverse experience for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we've got another question from Magdalene Marmon's class. If another student wants to come up and ask their question.
Owen. Hi, my name's Owen. I was wondering if this movie was scripted.
Great question.
No script. There was no script. There was an outline, and an outline was just me writing down what I thought might happen. And then, so as a documentary filmmaker, nonfiction, you can't control the story. So you have to just make really big guesses, and you have to think, okay, where would the most important part of a story happen? So maybe it would be, like for this, it was easy because we went to a powwow, so that we knew something was going to happen. But if you were to make your own story about your life, you'd want to think about an important time in your life that it would be fun to film, like a birthday party, or when you're going on a big trip, or graduating from high school. So you have to, think in big storyline ideas and just outline where fun things happen. And then you bring your camera and start to shoot there. And so that's kind of what we did.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question too. I mean, we work exclusively in documentary film, and this film is a documentary. Can you talk a little bit about how long this took you to make, and how do you decide? Like, a lot of these events, it seems like you have to show up and decide on what to capture and what to include in that, since it can't be staged. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I mean, we only shot 3 different places. So we shot Gathering of Nations in Albuquerque, and then we shot at their home in Mesquite for a couple days, and then we shot at the San Manuel powwow in California for 2 days. So we didn't really shoot that many times, but within those times that we did shoot, we were able to get enough stuff that it made the story worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a question from Claire Hidchef's class, and her question is, how do you think this film will affect younger generations of two-spirit youth?
I don't know. You tell me. You're all the younger generations. I'm just making this stuff. The truth is, right? And here's the very important thing about what we call native cinema. Like how we've been represented in Hollywood for the past 100 years has really been awful. It hasn't been a good story. And we've been at the butt of a lot of jokes and have been made fun of for a long time. Some of this is covered in a 2008 film from Neil Diamond. It was called Real Engines, and it's definitely a good primer, a story for y'all to, if teachers want to share that with their students, about like some of the twisted history of television and film about Indians. But the truth is we are just now in the beginning stages of what new native cinema looks like. And it's starting to have an effect globally, and it's starting to pick up steam. Sterling Harjo's piece just got, a Golden Globe nomination for Reservation Dogs. And, one of my best friends of all time, Chad Charlie, is a writer on Res Dogs. So it's like immediately having an effect in my world as much as everyone else's world. But it's just the beginning. So with my films like Sweethearts, we're making broad strokes. We're making a big statement. Here's the big statement. Being gay in Native America is okay. And it isn't anything different than just being whatever in Native America. And then as my films, the films I'm trying to make in the near future are big statements about our culture. Who are we? What are we? Why do we exist? but it's not my role to be able to break that down and be super sophisticated. That's the next generation's job and the generation below them. And so your generations that you exist in a new world where you know that there's such a thing as native cinema. See, and when I was growing up, there was no such thing as native cinema. So already in one generation, we're seeing the shift from absolutely no examples to a ton of good examples of what film could look like for native people. And so hopefully in your new generations, you'll be able to make new films or watch and support films by new filmmakers of your own generation that will help make sense of the world you're living in today. And so I don't know, that's kind of a politician's dancing around the question, but the truth is we're just right in the middle of a brand new time in American history, and that's native cinema.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and I'm hoping students seeing this can get excited about their own stories they're telling. Like you're saying, Ben-Alex, hopefully it can be a kind of a jumping off point for kids to get their ideas on paper and tell their own stories, because those are ones we're excited to hear about. I mean, it kind of brings me to my next question as well. We have a few classrooms that are jumping off that are going into other classes. We still have a few here with us today, so we have time for a few more questions. But I'm curious, this film does such a beautiful job evoking this like feeling and significance of attending a powwow through like visuals and audio and how you structure the story. Can you talk a little bit about, you said, you only had so much time, you didn't go shooting around that much, but how did you decide what to include, what to exclude to kind of create this story and build a certain kind of ambiance around what you were trying to say here?
Yeah, I wanted it to be what we call ethereal, moody, kind of romantic in a sense. Just I like a lot of very colorful, dark imagery. I like the idea that most of our good thinking that we do is not in school, no offense to school, but like, it's when the sun goes down, when we can sit on the hood of our cars, go fishing and sit and have conversations. Like a lot of what I think is very significant, theater for me is just spending time outdoors and with Indian people, talking about what we think might happen in the future, and that whole vibe is what I brought through Sweethearts, and like making sure that it was very colorful and dark, and had a sense of hope. One of the scenes where they're dancing and they say they'll be back, and they're dancing in the street. They're next to the stadium where thousands of people are dancing together and powwowing, but they're in the alley dancing in the street. Like an old movie that my mom used to watch called Singing in the Rain. And so I watched a lot of musicals growing up too. So I really love the imagery of people existing outside the circle and doing things on their own and not having to be plugged into the matrix of it all. they Indian is wherever they want an Indian to be, not where they're told to be. So there's a lot of meaning behind those things. But I wanted the whole film to feel really like very, very quiet and strange and otherworldly,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that certainly comes across. We have a question from Claire's class that is, what's the goal or hopes of this film? Seems like it's kind of made a resurgence after coming out a few years ago too.
I mean, the film just continues to have a life of its own beyond me. Like I've that Sean and Adrian, who unfortunately couldn't be here, I'm sorry for that. They own the film. I gave the film to them. Showtime picked up the film, and we'll be putting it on the air. And it's just, hopefully it's going to exist for a long time and as a teaching tool, along with the really great educational material that Big Sky was able to help develop, as an example of I think the film has achieved what it was meant to do. I mean, probably beyond my wildest expectations, that you all would be sitting here talking about this idea and enjoying native cinema and just being a participant in history as we continue to change history as a culture.
that seems like a really great note to end on. And I'm wondering if maybe you could just give a little bit of advice to any students out there that are interested in getting their feet wet in the film world, in all corners of the state. I think we have some interested filmmakers to be out there that might appreciate some words of wisdom.
Don't ever let anyone disrespect your art. Don't ever feel bad about making something that isn't good. Just continue to work on your projects, your ideas, and that crazy feeling you get from playing a video game or being on Twitch or watching movies or making a joke that everyone in your friends think are funny. Maybe someone else, maybe they're not funny to adults because it's like whatever. But just finding ways to just write that down. Think that everything you do is worthy of being documented. Write it down, film it, use your phones, use your tablets, use your GoPros. Do anything you can to put yourself, to record yourself, because that documentation of you, of who you are, your spirit, your tribe, your community, where you're living right now in the 21st century is valuable to people throughout time. And if we would have had half of that from our own ancestors, Native America would be a lot different today. But unfortunately, they didn't let us film ourselves, and they didn't let us practice our religions, and they didn't let us do any of this. So if anything, do all that you can to document yourself for the sake of that they just never wanted us to exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really great note to end on. And just a huge thank you to all the classrooms that were able to join us here today. Mike, is there anything you'd like to add here before we sign off?
Not really. I think it's a powerful film. It fits with the goals of Internet for All. And thanks for sharing that story, Ben-Alex. But one thing that you did mention about documenting, I remember in the film, they said they looked at old pictures and they incorporated some of that into their patterns for their regalia. And that's something they did. And so at least there's that, that we can go back to some of that stuff that was captured in photographs from a long time ago and at least incorporate some. But there's issues with some of that too, where they staged, some of those old pictures. But I think it's powerful, the power of film and media. And thanks for sharing your film, because it offers up that indigenous perspective that we often don't hear. So thank you. Pidamaya.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, classrooms, for joining us here today. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate hearing from you. I think it's what makes this program so special. I think there's students out there that are interested in exploring filmmaking. Our film club online course kind of gives a deeper, richer background on some of these films that we're exploring this year, and it helps you pitch story ideas and get into the storyboarding side of things, and through mentorship through Big Sky. So it's an online free program, and it runs throughout the rest of the year, and we were excited to pitch it this year. And Ben-Alex was so generous to lend us some of his knowledge and share a short film of his to kind of break it down and talk a little bit about his own inspiration, which we all need these days, and it's nice to hear from.
Thank you. Keep supporting the club. This is really excellent.
Students, if we didn't answer your questions, or teachers, feel free to email me at youth@bigskyfilmfest.org, and I can pass that along to Ben-Alex and Sean and Adrian, who we were hoping could be here today, but they have busy lives and weren't able to join us, which we totally understand. Keep your ears open for our Filmmakers in the Schools program, which happens in February, and we'll be sending some information out there. But it's been such a wonderful season, and having filmmakers like Ben-Alex and OPI's Mike and Jennifer to join us here is so great. And we're hoping to join with another great group of films next year. So thank you so much, and we'll hope to see you next time.
Thank you all.